At noon, so go ahead and kick things off. My name is Dorian Cunyon. I'm an executive coach and small business consultant, and I'm excited to have you join us today. Today, we are actually going to be talking about profit and love, and this is a virtual workshop really designed for small business owners to help them understand and get tips and best practices for growing the profitability of their business while doing something that they love.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Thank you for everyone that's joining us today. And for those that were with us last week as well. And again, this week we are recording this. So if you're not able to watch live, you are able to watch the recording later. And we encourage you to reach out with any questions, comments, feedback, anything. We would love for this to be interactive. So thank you for joining us. My name is Madeline McMahon. I am a fractional marketing strategist. I typically work with small business teams or founders and startup stage to develop a marketing strategy around current objectives and a budget. So a lot of what our conversations end up being about between Dorian and I are about, leveraging your team, understanding where you're at, and having conversations with the right people. So I am very excited that we have a special guest with us today. We talked a little bit maybe about this person last week, a little teaser, but I'm very excited for you to learn more about Dr. Rudy Jackson. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Rudy. And Dorian, I would love for you to share a little bit about why the three of us got connected and how the two of you know each other as a way to get started for our conversations this week.
Yeah, no, sounds good. So last week we talked all about motivating action. This week we're talking about building trust. And I felt like the perfect person to come in and talk about trust is Dr. Rudy Jackson. A little bit of background on why I trust him and why I think that you should trust him. Dr. Rudy is a professor. He's been in the education field for over 30 years. I first met him when I was at Randolph-Macon College. He was one of those mentors that helped me just acclimate from, being a kid that was really focused on sports to actually like realizing, hey, you're not going to make it to the NFL. You need to start leaning into your studies. And, it's just been a really good mentor and confidant over the years. About a year and a half ago, Dr. Rudy reached out to me. He was putting on a workshop around this new program that he was working on called Power6, and it was going to be presented to some high school students, and he wanted some people that had experience in the corporate world to come in and just validate some of the things that he was teaching these kids. And when I got exposed to the Power 6 Leader Model, I was just blown away. It's one of those things that I wish that I would have had when I was leading large teams and organizations. And over the last year, we've been working together to just kind of adjust the program so that it can really be something that whether you're an emerging leader or a small business owner, you can just pick up, learn the concepts, and implement. So I could talk all day long about Dr. Rudy and what he did at Davidson and what he did at Vanderbilt and what he's doing now at Kennesaw State. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to him just so he can give a brief introduction of himself, and then we can jump into the discussion today of trust.
Oh, that sounds great. That sounds great. You energized my lunchtime now. So I've got a lot to live up to, and I appreciate all those kind words. I think you know that my role has always been more than just faculty, but it has been mentor, and all of that mentorship is built on trust. So I appreciate you and Madeline asking me to come talk about trust and why trust matters, whether it's in the university setting, whether you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, or whether you're in a corporate environment. And so, you all gave me a couple of things to think about. And so what I really want to start with is this notion of why trust matters. And again,
Mm.
we really want to start broad. And I think we all understand that trust drives action because whenever we meet people, we use a lens of trust to decide how we're going to act. And that's pretty universal, whether we are thinking about our family, whether we're thinking about friends, and then even when we come into the workplace, whether we're new or whether we've been there for 30 years, we use trust as a lens to decide how we're going to act. And so I want to talk about some of the big things that we talk about, but actually I want to get down into some of the nuanced things that I think will really help small business leaders as they try to build trust. And we'll get to an issue of how we try to identify mistrust and distrust. And so the first thing I think we all know is that if there isn't a level of trust when we decide how we contribute to a team in the workplace. We're making decisions basically around, do I think this team member or my supervisor or a vendor is going to stab me in the back? Are they going to
Mm.
support me? Are they going to do right by me? Are they going to have my best interest in mind? And those thoughts and what I know about that person at that moment, or what I perceive about that person, guides the degree to which I act, the degree to which I contribute, and maybe most importantly, the degree to which I contribute fully. And so that's where we start. That what we know about the fear that could come around, whether I think you're going to do right by me, is a big motivator in how I act. So, number one, trust drives behavior in those ways. But in a more nuanced way, and in a way that I think a lot of small business owners don't take into consideration, is that there's some micro issues around fear that also come to play in whether an employee or a vendor would also act based on trust. And so I want to just bring two to the forefront. One is this issue of the fear of rejection. And so if you have an employee or a team member who has some trust issues that generates a fear that they'll be judged, or fear that they can't question a decision, or fear that if I ask a question in a meeting, I may be judged or my competence may be judged, then those issues around a fear of rejection will also impact whether that employee actually contributes fully. And I'm using that terminology specifically, contributing fully. The second is loss, that in some circumstances, we have employees that make decisions on whether they contribute based on the potential of them losing your support, of them losing
Mm.
status, of them losing visibility in the organization. And so those two fears that can kind of live under the surface, the fear of rejection and the potential fear of loss actually can play a big role. And one of the ways we know that is a lot of times we've all probably had this situation where we've been in a meeting and either you've said something or someone else has said something. And after the meeting, someone comes up and says, "Well, I'm really, really glad you said that. I was thinking that. And I wish I should have said it, or I'm glad you said it." And in the back of your mind, you're like, why didn't you say it? If it was so important, why didn't you say it? Right.
Mm.
And some of the reasons are the fear that people have. And I'm not saying fear that it's necessarily a bad thing, because it can be justified because of the ways in which they have either experienced or seen other people experience either reprimands or dismissals or silencing, that these things, they've noticed that maybe their contributions aren't validated when they do bring them forward, or when they do question a decision, maybe the repercussions are harsh. And so the environment that a small business owner or any leader creates to promote a trusting environment is critically important. And those are two that really operate under the surface, along with that big one about, I want to trust these folks so that they don't, so that I know that somebody's not going to stab me in the back. And so the last thing I'll say
Mm.
before we move on to the next point is that all of these issues that we see having an impact on whether an employee or vendor actually does contribute fully to the success of an organization can be impacted by fear, which in some cases can be mitigated by trust.
Mm.
So if we have trust, we can mitigate the fear that leads to full contribution. So that's really the big takeaway I want us to put a pin in, and we'll talk about a little more. And I'm about to kind of throw this back to Dorian for example, but I want to set this example as it's a wonderful example, and I don't think many people would consider. He's had some really unique insight because of his role at a very high level operational leader in 7-Eleven. But the use case he's going to talk about talks about trust, not internally, but externally. And so what I've talked about early has been, do I trust you, and how that impacts my behavior. The other aspect is that trust operates in a way in which, do I believe that you trust me? And the example that Dorian is going to talk about relates to the degree to which a business owner is micromanaging, sending the message that I don't trust you. And that's why I'm micromanaging you. I'm looking over your shoulder. And so that's going to be my setup. I'll toss that to Dorian and I'll let him give the example that he has.
So, frequently as an executive coach, I end up working with small business owners that, reach out and say, my team's just not performing to expectations. And as we kind of unpeel the onion and get to the details, frequently we find that trust is one of those major obstacles. And, with the situation that Dr. Rudy was mentioning, I was actually working with a franchise owner. He had reached out to me because he had 2 locations. He was trying to grow to a 3rd location, but he could not get approved for that 3rd location because his stores weren't being kept to standard. Over the course of around 6 months, we started exploring, what were some of the processes that were getting in the way, what were things about his culture, his organizational culture that were getting in the way, and developed a plan to, kind of course correct and get the business back on track.
Hmm. That is all, I think, very interesting. And it makes me think of an exercise that I've tried in the past, because a lot of that resonates with me. People are often nervous that they don't have a good idea, or they're worried about criticism, so not even just trusting the environment, trusting yourself to have an idea and trusting yourself to express it. And so I like, as an icebreaker, if I'm working with a new team, a bad idea exercise. And I'm interested if you guys have something similar. So what I will do is I'll prompt the room to volunteer a bad idea for the business. And my motivation behind that is hoping that people may volunteer something that they were nervous would sound silly or dumb. Maybe they're more likely to share that if it's under the disguise of a bad idea. So I work a lot with breweries and in craft beer. And so one of my favorite examples to use with the bad idea exercise is, well, let's get a yearbook ad for our brewery. And then everybody laughs and they're like, oh, well, high school kids can't drink beer, and, all of these different conflicts of interest. And then at the end of that engagement, I challenge everyone to come back together and find a way for it to actually be a good idea. And maybe it wasn't a high school ad about the craft beer. Maybe it was an ad about your next trade, your next job, your next career. So giving people the space to volunteer something they might not have otherwise, and then reinforcing some of those ideas with another activity. Do you do anything like that in your program? What experiences do you have with something along the lines of a bad idea exercise?
I want to kick it to Dr. Rudy just so we can share kind of some of the psychological thoughts process that kind of tie into that. And then I'll share, one of the things that I do as a coach.
Well,
Yeah.
love when you put me on the spot like that. So I think what I'm really hearing about the example of the bad idea is that there's a logic that we bring into the workplace, and then there's a practice. And so I can tell you that there are no bad ideas, and that's not going to resolve any fears you have. You actually have to see, you have to model, you have to get in, you have to look around and be like, oh, nobody's going to laugh at me. Oh, nobody's going to kind of roll their eyes at me, or nobody's going to just pick up their phone and dismiss me. And so the idea is that, for example, if we were to coach a business owner to say, hey, you got to make sure X, Y, and Z happens, it's not to be put in a memo. It's not just to be done in a one-to-one. You've got to actually model it in a safe environment, and people have to see, because seeing is believing. And telling is not always believing, because many times people are bringing their own experiences. And in the past, when I've done this, I've gotten the eyes or the rolls or the chuckles or the small talk. And so one of the things I think is important that Dorian, you're probably pointing out, is that we got to bring this stuff to life. It's not enough to know these things. It's really important that we practice and model. And that's why the coaching is so important, because information, and that's one of the difficulties with leadership coaching, is that a lot of it doesn't stick because folks don't get enough time to practice and get support and look at, is this stuff working? Can we measure whether things are working? If we try something for 3 months, can we then do a 360 with the team to see if folks feel a higher level of psychological safety? And that's really the buzzword that folks have used for the last 5 or 10 years, this notion of whether you feel safe in an environment to share fully and to be your authentic self without any kinds of repercussions that you may deem are negative. And so I think the big term that Dorian was trying to pull out of me is probably that psychological safety that we throw around a lot. But I would add one thing on there. As much as we talk about psychological safety, a lot of times what we don't talk about is mistrust. So we talk about trust. And if we thought about it, like, I don't know if y'all remember like the old baking timers that had the little thing that you clicked around and kind of started in the middle, or it started with the zero and it had time on it. Well, I many times think about trust and mistrust, and actually even distrust in that way, where you kind of start in the middle, kind of at zero, where you don't have trust or mistrust, right? And based on your experiences, hopefully trust is built and you kind of move in one direction, probably think maybe move to the right, turn to the right. And that then drives the connection between you and your coworkers, which then increases the engagement and the full engagement that you would have. But actually, there's also the side of mistrust. And this goes to actually showing that you believe this. And it's the mistrust that actually disengages folks and pushes people further away from one another and becomes the real barrier to productivity. And one of the things that Dorian and I look at a lot is we look at a lot of research, business research. And Gallup does a lot of research on employee engagement. And one of the latest numbers they put out was a big number of like $350 billion annually to the US economy that's lost due to productivity and absenteeism. And so when
Wow.
employees are actively disengaged, our nation loses over $350 billion. And that's billion with a B. And so if there's ever a bottom line reason why we should pay attention to trust and mistrust, it's that bottom line reason.
So there's a couple things that you said there that like really resonated with me. One is that timer. So when I think about that, you turn the timer and you give some time. That's almost like you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, getting to know them. But the moment that you let go, you get out of that meeting, that trust and that relationship kind of goes away. So periodically you got to come back and twist it back so that you can get some more time as far as the relationship goes. Now, getting into something similar to the suggestion that Madeline shared, in coaching, we have this yes and kind of approach. And what it is if somebody throws out an idea, like, yes, we could do that, and we could also do this. And it's just this iterative process where you're not saying that an idea is a good or bad. In fact, one of the things that Dr. Rudy teaches is you want to have a good mentality, no matter what happens inside your business, good, because that suggestion, that idea, even that failure is an opportunity to learn and get better. So really taking that positive approach to anything that comes up in the business and really looking for, like, how can we learn from this? How can we grow from this? How can we come together is going to position your organization for success.
Yeah. Madeline, you also asked more about kind of what we do, and whether it's through our coaching or whether I'm working with a group of students or a group of staff members in a nonprofit, habits and routines are the things that stick. And so I think we can all say that most people in an organization can't, repeat the organization's mission statement, right? Or their values. Some can, but most can't. But if you have habits that you start every meeting with, or you end every meeting with, or you reinforce and recognize, that's how you build culture. And actually, culture is a big part of our entire system, the Power 6 leader system. And we are big on building culture because it's something that can be sustained. And one of the things that we ask uh, our clients to do is to think about creating some kind of routine or norm, whether it's a practice, whether it's an acronym that tells and signals your team that our team does it this way. Seth Godin has this great saying where he talks about marketing, but he uses this phrase about people like us do things like this, which I think is just a perfect summary of what culture means. And
Hey,
so,
Rudy, I want to stop you there real quick because Madeline's actually a marketing expert, so I'm super interested.
oh,
As you're
he
hearing
knows.
this around the marketing, Madeline, like
Oh,
how do you help
this helps.
business owners kind of clarify like what their values are and what they stand for?
That's interesting because I was actually going to ask a question kind of in that same vein. How do you distinguish in trusting the process versus trusting the person? You know, to take this back to the leader and the individual. And last week we talked about motivating the team through action and knowing who we are and what we mean to accomplish. And what you're describing in that accountability and in those systems makes a lot of sense to me. But I think what I was hoping to hear in that nugget is how to still be the trustworthy individual and not just having the culture be a process, not just having that overall buy-in, but being the inspirational, trustworthy person. And I'll tie that back to the question you asked me. One of my biggest struggles that I find for clients with trust is gatekeeping, is the fear that there's not enough room for everyone. So people are afraid to share and collaborate because someone else might steal their one good idea, like there could only be one. So I think that all, to tie that all in, being a trustworthy person and having transparency in your objectives and in your culture and in your process, I think makes a really big impact, because what we don't want to do is autopilot trusting the process, right? So how can we tie this back into us as individual leaders and being trustworthy?
So what I would say is that one of the things that we always suggest that companies and leaders do is that they set a standard for their accountability of a process. And so we're going to move towards doing things a certain way. And we may never get to it 100%, but the standard is set there. And so we can have conversations about what the standard is and what helps us get to the standard and what do we do when we don't meet the standard. That's separate, not disconnected, but it's somewhat separate or different than being a trustworthy individual or member of our team. And so when we think about us basically doing what we say we're going to do, being consistent in not only our behavior, but our support for others, being consistent and having integrity for holding up the values of an organization. And so if, for example, we prioritize having a trusting working environment, one of the things that we may ask everybody in the team to do is to support people when they say they feel like something has happened that's dissolved the trust that they have for the team. And so that's actually a requirement for everybody and not just the leader. And so we have to look out for that. And so I think to your point, when we're looking at the individuals being trustworthy, and also the processes being trusted, both are moving in hopefully the same path. But there are differences and different requirements and responsibilities everyone has. Now, this actually leads to what we base the entire system upon, which are the responsibilities of the leader. And so we believe anybody can lead, but to lead, you have to commit to the responsibility of building a culture of teamwork. That's one of the things you have to do to be a leader. You have to commit to the responsibility of building teamwork. And then the other responsibility is you have to commit to protecting team momentum. And so those two things
Love that.
are foundation for how we ask people to be trustworthy and also to trust the processes that we have. And if we really believe that, and if we have the psychological safety, that means that anybody can raise their hand and request help at any time. That means that anybody can raise their hand and say, hey, I see something that I think can improve this system that we're using or this process that we're using. And so we have to walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So.
I'd love to understand more about, like, if I'm someone that wants to have that psychological safety in my team and with the people that I'm working with, where do I find out more information about that? How do I become someone that is creating that environment? Like, what are the indicators for that psychological safety? How do I get that process started?
So I'm really, really, really glad you asked that, because what I've seen and what the research says is that the tough part of trust, interestingly enough, is not building trust. The tough part of trust is recognizing or understanding the importance of trust and then recognizing the indicators of trust and mistrust. And so we spent a lot of time determining what we could put into a diagnostic evaluation to help a coach and a business leader identify behaviors of trust and mistrust so that they could then respond. You can't build trust if you don't know what to look for. You can't address mistrust if you don't know what to look for. And the most glaring example of that is we have people who are on teams who show up every day to work. They show up on time, they do work, and they are not giving everything they could give. And we've heard the term of silent quitting, right? And so they're not contributing fully, but they look like they are there fully. And so it's almost like the kid in the front of the classroom that's there and they smile and they nod their head, and they're quiet and they don't cause any problems, but they don't give you a lot, right? And so, I've had a couple of those in my day, and, no shade, but it is what it is. You're getting your education, but you also should be contributing to the learning environment. Same thing in your work environment. You're there to do your job, but if you really want to 10x your business, you ought to be looking to capture the synergy that's there within every one of your team members, employees. So they're not only just doing their job, but they're helping everybody do their job better. And so you've got this whole issue around people showing up and not contributing fully. And that's something that we miss. So what we did was, my background is as a school psychologist. So when I got my PhD, I had to learn how to, administer an IQ test or an achievement test. We had to look at, why certain questions mattered and other questions didn't. And so I kind of took that expertise to develop the diagnostic leadership evaluation tool that we use in our business. And so we actually have 5 questions that a business owner would self-rate. And then now we have some data to have a conversation about the degree to which the business owner feels like their team has a trusting work environment, the actual behaviors that indicate that people trust each other, any processes that facilitate trust. And then we look at the degree to which people are willing to actually support people who experience mistrust or distrust, and what the actual leader does for the person who violates team trust. So we have these 5 questions, and the self-rating becomes a point of entry. Because if Dorian is working with a client and he's trying to pull those things out in discovery through questioning, it may not even be on this a business owner's radar about trust. He may think, oh yeah, trust is good because people are showing up. But when you kind of get under the surface, like underneath that deep into that iceberg, then you find out, well, yeah, nobody asked any questions. So how, for example, how do you launch a strategic plan and nobody asks questions?
That's concerning.
You got
So Madeline, when you're working with clients, what are some signs that you recognize that a client might not be trusting you enough?
That is a great question. I am someone that's very data focused. I like to lead with justifications. And so if I find that someone is nervous even about my research, that will definitely feed how I handle that relationship or how I nurture that relationship, because people learn things in different ways and absorb information in different ways. So a way that trust plays a really big factor for me is in how I articulate and share the information that I have. I want to be seen as a resource and as an ally to your business. I don't want it to be something that is intimidating, or I don't want to explain things in a way that make them seem more like a challenge. So a big sign for me is in the questions that people ask. And again, a big pain point I see is the gatekeeping, where people within an industry are nervous to share with each other because they're worried that only one person can be successful. And I spend a lot of time reassuring people that there is enough space for everyone, right? If there's not enough space, you're not in the right room. So trusting in vendors, trusting in marketing dollars, that's a big one. The return on investment for your marketing effort is not immediate. It may not always be literal. So I have a lot of conversations about trust and about managing expectations. I think more of what I end up objectively doing is helping manage expectations so that trust can be appreciated when it is happening, even if it's not to your preference, for example.
I love that. And I think back to when I was with 7-Eleven, franchisees, I feel like they have a competitive advantage because they're part of this larger system where I would go in and talk with one franchisee and they would say, this is working. And I'd be like, great. So then I would take that idea and I'd go over to another franchisee and say, hey, this new item is selling or this new thing is working. And collectively, the franchisees would win together because that was that flow of information. And when you think about small businesses, the fear of competition can reduce the collaboration where, if you have a defined market, there's probably somebody like you can grow your business and somebody else can grow their business without you guys even bumping into each other. So I think that, individuals like you play an important role in helping people to realize there's a lot of people out there. You can sell to a lot of people and you can collaborate and get some good ideas without having the fear of if I let this idea into the wild that somebody else is going to steal it and take away my market.
So it occurs to me too that confidence and self-awareness are incredibly important components of this. As you're developing these leaders and as you're working with coaches that impact other people's lives, how much of it is reassurance? How much of it is remembering to tell yourself that you know what you're doing and to trust yourself, and how much of it is you trust yourself because you continue to do the research or because you have resources available to, where does trust come into play in that sense?
That's one of the things I love about the framework that Dr. Rudy's put together because, we may identify like trust is the issue, but then we have to explore like, what is it about trust that's actually stopping us from being effective? Is it our own insecurities, our own self-doubt that's getting in the way? So that is really where the coaching, me as a coach, I put on my hat and I really get into mindset and help people really explore like, who are you? You know, when
Mm.
when everything is, away, like who are you? Who do you want to be? And if you can consistently build your brand and be consistent about, what you value and what you do, then two things will happen. One, you can have more confidence in yourself because you can predict what's going to happen because you got plenty of experience. You have a bunch of wins doing things. But then more importantly, your team can have confidence in you because they know, okay, everybody has a bad day every once in a while, but Madeline's going to do the best she can. to deliver great marketing advice and give us guidance. And if we trust her, that she's going to help us get from where we are today to where we want to be.
Yeah, I really like that. The other and the issue of confidence is really important, and I think a big benefit of our system is that it provides clarity and structure. And so what we find is that when people get moved into a mid-level manager position or leadership position, or they're an entrepreneur and they're starting a business, or they're moving into a leadership of a small business, sometimes they have training on what matters as they lead, sometimes they don't. And what we are hearing back now from the people who come through our system is that what we've given them, and it was specifically designed to be simple and able to provide them clarity where to focus their time. That actually takes off the burden of everything going on around you in the world, the distractions, the responsibilities, all the things in your job and outside your job that take your attention away. Now you got a system where you can come back in and say, these two things really matter. I got to keep the focus on building this culture of teamwork. I got to keep the focus on protecting momentum. And now I can use that as my North Star to lock in on how I want to work with this issue of trust. And so regardless of how much I have to increase my individual confidence, I'm going to benefit and the team's going to benefit from these processes in this culture that actually drive teamwork and drive trust. And so even if my confidence only goes up a little bit, I may be 10xing the trust on my team. And that 10x on the trust may actually pull my confidence along, because I may have had some experiences that really have limited my confidence. And sometimes I need to see the results that these things matter. And so I think in addition to all that we do to support and build up the confidence of our leaders, that's crucial. We continue to do that. We also want to and see the value in putting these things in place that build culture so that both of those things can occur at the same time.
So, Madeline, as we're kind of going through trust, we say, trust is kind of the goal. Psychological safety is kind of the anchor concept of what we need to aspire to. The framework, and you guys are getting this for free. Like most of the time people have it. But the framework that we use is called teams to help people actually get more trust. And, if you're comfortable, I'd like to kind of work through the teams concept with you and kind of think about like a vendor, a client that you're working with and how you can increase trust.
Okay.
Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So the first part of teams is together. And, when you're starting off with a client, I think it's really important to have some processes in place as far as how frequently we're going to meet, what are the meetings going to look like. So when you're typically starting with a new client, what are the expectations that you set with them as far as the frequency of meetings and what meetings look like?
I do typically try to build that into the structure of my contract because I am fractional. Every engagement that I have is different. So I typically help guide the relationship by setting that expectation up at the beginning. And I typically say it will be up to this number of hours. So I give myself some flexibility because I also know that I'm still building trust in that they don't appreciate or know how long it might take me to do something or build something and develop something. So something that I often keep in mind in those initial stages is setting people up for success in how they expect other vendors to perform. Sometimes being the fastest doesn't make you the most efficient. And so do I want you to acknowledge the time I invested in this or the effort I invested in this? So really how I try to get that process started is by setting the expectation, by giving parameters of what to expect. And then I love data. So I typically will provide resources right away. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to kind of flex and that I have some collateral prepared for you, but it really helps me understand where you're at in the process based on how much of it you have reviewed or have actually taken the time to look into. Are you a client that's going to want me to walk you through all of the pages, or are you going to trust me because you've had an opportunity to do independent research before our one-on-one? So I do try to take those things into consideration. And over the years of being in business, I've created kind of a framework for myself.
Okay.
But I'm curious on what the blocks could be or what the steps could be so that I know I'm giving all of my clients the same experience while I uncover how they absorb information or what it would take to earn their trust.
Hey, Rudy, you got any thoughts on, when you're just starting off with a new, relationship, how to establish trust, from the beginning?
I like to be, and I think we overuse the word transparent, but I like to communicate the importance of trust early.
Yeah.
And I don't want to assume that. And that
Mm.
becomes my way of modeling the importance, because that's the trap I see. Lots of people feel like everybody's going to treat their work experience the same way you would. And so
Mhm.
I may come to work as a trusting person and expect all my employees to trust me the way I trust them. And that's a fantasy. And you got to realize that everybody doesn't have the same level of trust. They don't have the same investment. And so some of what you do to message your vision, some of what you do to intentionally message how important trust is, I think has to be done very, very early. And I actually try to over communicate that. Again, we talked about using the TEAMS acronym and letting people know at the beginning, for example, of a monthly meeting or any one-to-ones that, hey, you know what we're about here? We're about excellence. That's what we're always about, whether we're talking about a win or whether we're talking about an area of improvement, that our team is about excellence. And so the more people hear that, the more I believe it can stick. And so that's one of the things that I do. I over communicate those aspects of teamwork.
So I just picked up two new things that I want to build into my discovery calls and my first conversations. And that's going to be, do you trust me? And it's like, the answer is probably no, or kind of, because you're starting off. But then the follow-up question, what do you need to see from me in order to trust?
Mm.
Because
That's
most people,
powerful.
if you think about it, it's like, okay, yeah, I need you to show up on time. I need you to be consistent with your work. But if you can get somebody to articulate, this is what I need, then you don't have to guess at it. You can just say, okay, I'm gonna do my best to deliver those things to you.
And that variation is the same thing we see in recognition. We always tell leaders and managers recognition is important for your employees, but how an employee wants to be recognized differs. In the same way, how an employee develops trust for you is going to be different. And so I think asking them that is a way to unlock that and to have a more genuine conversation. Because I think most people raise their hand and say, no supervisor has ever asked them that. That variation is the same thing we see in recognition. We always tell leaders and managers recognition is important for your employees, but how an employee wants to be recognized differs. In the same way, how an employee develops trust for you is going to be different. And so I think asking them that is a way to unlock.
Mm.
So the number two thing with the E is all about empowerment. And I think that is really important, especially as a vendor. Whenever I'm starting with somebody, I ask, like, what am I empowered to do? Because you don't want to violate somebody by doing things that are not in alignment with their expectations. How, when you're starting off with a client, do you understand what things that they're trusting you to do? And then what are the things that they really, you got to check with them before you're doing?
Well, from my desk, it has been my experience that my clients would love for me to just go ahead and do it all for them, but that is not my shtick.
Yeah.
So I need them to trust the process and trust that I will help them get to that point. Or I think what I'm sitting here thinking, I love that, asking, do you trust me? And I think my question was, do you trust me to help you make money? Or do you trust that this process will generate revenue for you? If we go through this, do you trust that you will see a return on investment? And that would be a very valuable question for me. And that is something that I am constantly internally striving to quantify and to qualify. All of the hours of work that I do are not necessarily something that are seen. It's not necessarily going to have that immediate return on investment. So do you trust that by the end of our contract, we will reach those milestones, we will have those accomplishments, you will have learned something in the process? So that I think is very interesting. So for me, empowerment, funny enough, I think my biggest opportunity for empowerment is to empower people to celebrate themselves and to market themselves and to acknowledge their own milestones. I work with a lot of people that work by themselves, so I want to empower you to celebrate a win by identifying what that win is, and I need you to trust me that this is a win. It's a win because we say so, and I want to empower you to celebrate that because we decided so. So that's what comes to mind in that example.
And I love that because, leadership is something that goes two ways. So as the person that's hiring you, like they're empowering you. It's like, okay, Madeline, I'm going to trust you to come up with my strategy. I'm going to empower you to come up with some copy and some different things. But conversely, you have to empower them to be themselves and actually communicate, because you know what it takes for somebody to be successful from a marketing standpoint. And they really have to trust you that you're going to, guide them, protect them, make sure that they don't do anything that they can't come back from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the number three thing is all about accountability. And, accountability is one of those things that I'm sure inside of your contracts, there's some real clear accountability about, what you're responsible for. And there's probably some accountability that for what the business owners accountable for. How do you handle accountability within relationships with clients?
That one's one of my favorite ones, and that I'm big on analytics. So one of the calls that is going to be on your radar when you're working with me is we're going to have a dedicated call where we actually look at performance. And that's where accountability really comes in, because it's we did this and it worked or did not work because of. It's not, I wonder if this worked or could this have worked. We know if you complete the steps and you don't have the experience that you were expecting, there's an opportunity to make a change, to make an adjustment. Or if we speculate that things are going to happen and then we have the accountability in reviewing those and it was accurate, then it's how do we scale? How do we keep going? So a big one for me, and how I also develop some of that trust, is you can trust that we're going to talk about your analytics and your performance month over month as we work together.
What I love about that is,
yeah,
when we're talking about the different skills, we talk about driving results and you got to have clear goals, talk about delegation. But I think at that trust phase, that's where you actually have those conversations about, this is what it's going to look like in the future. This is the numbers that are important that we're going to pay attention to. This is the assignments that you're responsible for, that I'm responsible for. So there isn't any surprises. People can kind of have certainty around what the future is going to look like.
And Doctor, you shared something earlier that I think is really impactful, that some of these are habits we need to develop, and some of these are things that may not seem exciting or important each time we document them, like, having a morning meeting and recording the morning meeting metrics day over day. That may seem, like just another thing you do, but ultimately you've got this full record of everything you've accomplished. You've got notes with dates and team members and all of those that only took a couple of seconds each day, but would have taken forever if you tried to sit it down and do it all at one time. So by having the discipline to document things and intentionally making those notes, I think that's another way to not only build trust, but in trusting yourself in that things actually happened the way you thought they did, because you're documenting in real time, right? It's not just a summary of what you remember happened. It's actual documents about things that happen over day. And I think that that's really incredible for discipline, and that helps build trust amongst the team as well. Don't always trust your memory, right? So if we have these notes, we trust the process, we can check our notes, all of that. I think that that's phenomenal to bring up again as well.
I would agree. Doran, I'll let you finish up, but I do want to come back to a point. So I think you're going to go through one last.
Yeah, I'll go through the
go
last
through
two. So the M is all about momentum. So, and it goes directly to what you just said about, we have to have goals. But those goals, we can't just say we're making $1 million in sales right now. We want to get to 2 million. Like that can feel big. That can, like, how do we know that we're making progress towards that? But actually making some micro goals so that, you know what, by the end of next month, we want to be at 1.1 million. What do we need to do to get there? And then if we get there, we celebrate, like you were saying. And then it's
Yep.
like, okay, what's the next milestone so that we can feel that momentum and it can build? Because when people are positive, they're open. When they're fearful, they're closed. And we want people to be open and creative and really have confidence that they're capable of doing great things. The last one is around support. And I think that one, when we were putting together this concept, it was just team. It was just team. And I was like, Rudy, something's missing. Like, what is it that's missing? And it just dawned on us, it's support. It's like you can have people together, you can have empowerment, you can have accountability, and you can have momentum. But what happens when people aren't being consistent? What happens when they're not hitting their goals? That's when you as a leader have to provide support to help people, be who they're meant to be. And I really feel like that's one of the big hallmarks of, whether you're a leader or you're a service provider that's providing something to a client, the client's hiring you because they're in a hole and they want to get out of that hole. And your job is really to say, hey, I've got the rope. I'm throwing it down. If you trust me, you hold on to it, we're going to be able to get you out of that hole. And that's really just where the support comes through, that you are being inspirational, motivational, directional, so that people really can accomplish what they aspire to accomplish.
That's great.
Love that.
I want to just share in a way to piggyback and validate the importance of empowerment. I was on LinkedIn and I actually made a post from some survey data that we received from one of our coaches. And so we've had some coaches now who've gone through our program. They're working with their clients, and we've set it up in a way in which we get feedback from them after 90 days. And so just within the last 5 days, I've made a post on some survey data that I think basically confirms what we're talking about around empowerment. So I just want to share this real quickly and see this quote. And so this is basically a testimonial where where one of our coaches' client had a 360. And so their entire team gave feedback on the changes in their manager over 90 days. And the quote was simply, she has fostered a great work environment in which we feel empowered to complete our tasks, but also feel safe enough to ask for help within 90 days. And so to Dorian's point about the importance of empowerment, and to Madeline's point about having data, as we're trying to build confidence, the actual growth of a client, the growth of that business leader, the growth of that small business owner, seeing the results actually confirm that what they're doing works. And we always say results rule. And so just to have a simple quote like this allows us to know that these things are working, and it gives us the momentum we need, and it builds that trust that we are having an impact. And so I just wanted to share that as a way to confirm that these things are all working together. And before we get off, I'm not going to let this conversation end without Dorian telling you how his client actually grew and what he attained from the impact of Dorian's coaching. So tell us how it worked out for that client you talked about earlier.
Yeah. So just closing the story, that client, we took a look at his entire business and a couple of changes that we implemented. One was we started having a ratio as far as positive feedback versus negative feedback. And, when I asked him before, it's like, how many times do you think you say something negative towards something positive? And he's like, man, it's probably 3-1. Like I'm criticizing. When they finally do it, I say thank you. And I'm like, well, let's try something new. Instead of looking for what's wrong, let's look for what's right. I want you to have a goal of giving 3 compliments for every criticism that you have. That that simple action probably was the biggest unlock for him overall, because when he started praising his employees, saying, "Hey, I appreciate that you did that. I appreciated that you did that. I appreciated that you did that. Would you mind if you fix this for me?" At
Mm.
first, they thought he was high. They were like, "What is going on with this guy? He ain't never this positive." But after 2 or 3 weeks, when they were like, "No, this is just how he is now. He's being more appreciative," then they were excited. They were feeding off the positivity. They wanted to
I
show
love
him.
that.
And that was the big dynamic change that we saw, that it started being that he would walk into the store and an employee would grab him and say, "I cleaned this shelf. Let me show you." And they
Oh,
wanted,
that's great.
yeah, exactly, because they wanted him to appreciate, and they knew that if they showed him the work that he was doing, that he would show appreciation. So that franchisee, over the course of the 6 months, his store got cleaner. We actually saw an increase in sales, which was not the initial goal, but surprise, when your store is cleaner and more organized, people spend more money. And then he actually qualified for that third store. And the thing that I'm most proud
Wow.
about is, early on, he was getting phone calls at night, and it was driving him crazy. It was driving his wife crazy. And he was just like, "I don't understand why they're calling me about these simple things." They were calling him because they didn't trust him. They were worried that if they didn't
Mm.
communicate, that they were going to get in trouble, and they were acting out of fear. By him
Wow.
investing in the relationship, they stopped calling him at night on things that weren't important. They would allow it to wait to the morning, and his quality of life in his relationship at home got better too.
Well, and that feels like the perfect lead in too to what we're going to talk about next week. So we are getting close in our time here. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. We are going live again next week. You will be able to watch week 1 recorded. Week 2 will be available tomorrow. Next week, we're going to dive into producing results and measuring what matters. And that just felt like the perfect lead in, closing out that franchise story and knowing that next week we're going to be able to better dial in and better identify what these milestones could be and what you should and could be measuring that will continue to feed these results you're getting from having buy-in from your team and a team that trusts you. So I'm really excited, looking forward to that. But while we are still together, Dr. Rudy, is there anything that you'd like to share with our lovely viewers, or is there anything that we can do to thank people for joining us here today? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought is that I want to make sure whatever we do brings value. And we know that small business owners are our target audience. We know that what Dorian and I do in our business, Power6 Leader, we support ICF coaches. Dorian and I have actually put together a very short 30-minute drop-in session this Saturday at 12 o'clock, excuse me, at 11 o'clock. And so I know you have a QR code for this. This is going to be a free drop-in. If you have a question about how you can improve your business, how coaching can help you get from where you are to where you want to go, and if you're an ICF certified coach, if you want to build your coaching business, we're going to take the time to actually meet with you on Saturday at 11 o'clock to hear what you need and to provide you some support to reach your goals. And so I appreciate you all sharing the information on this so that our business owners, our coaches can get what they need to be successful.
So, Madeline, I'd love to hear. I know you're really good about summarizing takeaways. What is your biggest takeaway from today?
Surprising, I wouldn't have necessarily expected this, but off the cuff, I think actually my bigger takeaway is that trust is not universal. Not everyone understands or appreciates trust in the same way. So by breaking it out and understanding these different components, I think it gets us a little bit closer to having a universal trust, right? Not just the concept of do I trust or mistrust someone, but what uh, qualifies as trust and what I should be looking for in trustworthy engagements. Just the idea that trust is not one size fits all is my big takeaway. What about you,
Yeah,
Dorian?
for me, and I'm surprised. I think about questions all the time, and I try to have the best questions. But I don't think that I ever had this question of, what do you need to trust me more? And my biggest takeaway is, if there's something that you want, you got to be specific and ask for it. So moving forward, that is one that I'm definitely going to ask myself and then encourage my clients to ask, just so that we can work on building more trusting relationships.
And what about you, Dr. Rudy? Any final thoughts, final takeaways? This has been such a wonderful hour together. What else you got?
My final thought is expanding trust beyond the traditional team. I grew up playing sports, and you think about your teammates, or you work on a team. I work in an educational environment, your division or your department. But you've raised and expanded my view around trust, not only to the people who work for and with you, but also those vendors who you work with to support your business being successful. And so that, I gotta wash that through that lens now to see how that fits, if it fits differently or not. But you've just expanded that group into kind of what I know and think about trust and teamwork.
Well, I appreciate everybody for joining us. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to us on LinkedIn. And if you want to learn more about working with me directly as a coach, my website is www.yourpathexecutivesolutions.com. It's a long name, but we got a QR code to make it easier for you to find us. So please reach out. If there's anything I can do to support you, just let us know.
And we'll add the details for that Saturday session to the LinkedIn event. We can tag those in there so that people have access to RSVPing for that as well.
Okay. Thank you. It was a pleasure being with you.
Thank you so much. This was great. We'll see everyone next week.
See you.
All right. See you soon.